If you have not heard, the Philadelphia 76ers stink. They are 2-11, the worst record in the National Basketball Association. And that is hard to do for multiple reasons. Number one, the top of next year's draft is loaded. This is the year to be bad. And by the end of the year, I expect a bunch of teams in the NBA to be tanking like crazy. So, being as bad as teams that actually want to be bad is a bit of a red flag. But what makes this situation so much worse is that when the Sixers entered the season, everybody thought they would be good. So what happens when you're 2-11? You have a team meeting. And that's the time-honored tradition. And after the Sixers got their doors blown off by the Miami Heat on Monday night, turning a 19-point lead into a 17-point loss, hard to do, they had their team meeting of their own. Reporters noted that Nick Nurse, who usually talks to the media about 10 to 15 minutes after the final buzzer for most games, he took almost an hour. And then when he finally got to the podium, Nick Nurse did admit that the Sixers had a team meeting, but he did not get into the details of said meeting. Well, we got some details today. From Shams Charania at ESPN, here is the key passage. And the big takeaway, Tyrese Maxey let Joel Embiid have it about his daily work habits. I mean, you see some stuff in here about how he's late for team meetings and how that is affecting everyone. And that's no bueno. I mean, that's just not good enough from your best player. And clearly, Tyrese and Joel, they have a good relationship. Tyrese has the ability to call him out, but that's a big deal, right? And somebody leaked that to Shams, and yeah, it's just not very good. So before we get into that team meeting, though, I am going to list all of the things that have gone wrong for the Sixers this year that have led to said team meeting, because it is a doozy. So much has gone wrong. You could even argue that everything that could go wrong, maybe besides a season-ending injury, has gone wrong. Because, I mean, this is crazy. I covered a team that started 0-18 back in 2016, and this is a much worse start because of this team's preseason's expectations. Back at Media Day, I remember we all thought this team was going to be good. So let's go over kind of the Sixers' disastrous start and how they have gotten here. And number one, it starts with Paul George's injury in the preseason. The Sixers are playing a preseason game in Atlanta, and George, it's not exactly a nasty spill, but it's an awkward hyperextension of his leg. Now, the Sixers actually came out okay from this injury. It was only a few weeks on the shelf for George, but he was diagnosed with a bone bruise and a hyperextended left knee. Two things here are important, though. The 2 weeks were critical because George is the most important piece that the Sixers are integrating on this team. Daryl Morey gave PG a 4-year, $212 million contract in the offseason. So that lost George some time that he's had to make up over the last few weeks, and we'll get to that in a minute. It's been a little bit of a struggle. But I would also like to note the injury designation here. Bone bruise and hyperextended left knee. The Sixers initially said PG would be reevaluated in 1 week. And he came back in a few weeks, a pretty standard injury and a pretty standard injury reporting by the team. And that injury provides a nice contrast with what else went wrong in the preseason. And really, that's the most important development to note here. And that is that Joel Embiid missed the start of the season. And in true Sixers fashion, they dropped this news on everyone the day before the season. They called it left knee management. And they also said the following about Embiid. Those are a bunch of nonsense words. And it put Nick Nurse, who gets paid a lot of money to coach the basketball team, and he's doing a very poor job of that. We'll get to that in a sec. But he also gets paid a lot of money to be the front-facing face of the team, to deal with the media on a daily basis. That put Nick Nurse in a tough spot. And it's just classic Sixers poor messaging. Like they have been doing this since the process, and specifically, they have been doing this since the beginning of the process with Joel Embiid. You saw how normal that Paul George injury was, and the Embiid situation is just completely murky. You cannot tell us that everything is going to plan and that the plan includes Joel Embiid missing the first week of the season when you were dropping that plan on people the day before the season started. I mean, you can do that, but everyone has the right to call you out on it after you do so. So what happens with Embiid and George out to start the season? Well, the Sixers stink. They start out 1-4, and that includes some bad losses. We're going to run down a couple of them quickly. They lose to Milwaukee on opening night by 15 points, and I think at the time I and a lot of other people thought, okay, no harm, no foul. The Bucks are going to be a good team this year. But Doc Rivers' crew went on to lose 8 of their next 9 games. So that's a bad loss. They follow that game up by getting out-rebounded and out-hustled by a 3-12 Toronto team that did not even have a few starters on the floor for that game. Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, they didn't even play. Then they lost to the improved Pistons at home by 10 points in a game that was not even that close. Like, it was more a 20-point loss. And that's the thing here, guys. The Sixers are not losing coin flip game after coin flip game. They are getting blown out. So on a day when people are lauding Maxey's leadership for standing up to Embiid, we'll get to that in a sec because I think that is valid. I see a lot of comments wishing that the Sixers would turn the page and hand the keys over to Tyrese Maxey. This is Maxey's team now, people are saying. And there's only one problem with that. I would point to this stretch and say, if your team is led by Tyrese Maxey, if Tyrese Maxey is the best player on the team, your team is not going to be very good. There are stats to back this up. The Sixers are 18-35 without Embiid the last 2 years, and Maxey has played in a lot of those games. He is just not the type of advanced passer that elevates his teammates. And his scoring efficiency drops a lot too, in part because instead of all of those catch and shoot shots, which he feasts on, he is such a great catch and shoot three-point shooter. Those are the shots he gets with Joel Embiid. When Joel Embiid is not playing with Tyrese Maxey, those catch and shoot shots turn into off the dribble threes, and he is much less efficient on those. And I don't want to be too hard on Maxey here. I love the kid. Him becoming an all-star saved the Joel Embiid era in Philadelphia in a lot of ways, at least for a few years. He is everything you would want as a teammate, as a worker. He has been absolutely fantastic. Embiid clearly loves him. I made this point already, but the fact that Tyrese can call him out in a meeting, I think says a lot about the trust he has earned in that organization over the past few years. But there is a big difference between, let's call it, the 25th best player in the league and the 5th best player in the league. And if you want to say Joel has been better than the 5th best player in the league when healthy over the past couple of years, I am not going to argue with you on that. Anyway, the point is the top players in the league, they have an outsized impact even compared to the guys who make the All-Star team. So what happens after that 4th game? Well, things start to get weird here, and Embiid shoves a columnist in the locker room. And it was something that had clearly been brewing. Just the day before this happened, Embiid finally spoke to the media after missing the first week and a half of the season. And he said a lot of important things in that media availability, some of which we will get back to, but Joel emphasized that he was trying to get back on the floor and his body was betraying him.
I've done it. From what I can tell you, I've broken my face twice. I came back early with the risk of losing my vision. I have broken fingers. I still came back, when I see people saying he doesn't want to play. I've been way too much. I've done way too much, for this city and, putting myself at risk, for people to be saying that. So
I do think there is some merit in those comments. Now, the "I've done way too much for the city" was the headline of that availability, and that did not go over well in Philadelphia, and I understand that point. Joel is a great player, and there are a lot of reasons that the Sixers have not had a ton of playoff success, but the fact of the matter is he has not made it out of the second round of the playoffs, so that blew up on talk radio. That got people angry, which I understand. But Joel has played through a lot of crazy stuff. I mean, he was playing in that Knicks playoff series last year at what, like 50%? And he was still pretty good, despite the fact he was dragging his left leg up and down the court. Anyway, my point is, you can call Joel Embiid injury prone, but I would not question his toughness. He has played through a lot of stuff. Now, Embiid also took umbrage with the columnist, and that columnist is Marcus Hayes of the Philadelphia Inquirer, mentioning 2 of his family members in the lead of that column, a lead that Hayes eventually deleted. And after the Memphis game, the day after Embiid spoke at that practice, Hayes went into the Sixers locker room and sort of faced the music with Embiid. That is an old school journalism move. You write something negative about someone, you show your face the next day, and it didn't go great. I mean, Hayes showed his face in the locker room, and Embiid was none too pleased. I was not in the locker room that night, so I do not want to speak too much on what happened. I'm going on kind of firsthand accounts from people who were there. But Embiid got into an intense conversation with Hayes. He told him the following, and then he shoved him. And on one hand, it's understandable that Joel was angry at the column. I completely understand that, especially as it was something that got deleted by Hayes. On the other hand, you cannot have the precedent of players putting their hands on media members moving forward. You just can't have it from the NBA's standpoint. So Joel gets suspended for 3 games and ends up missing the first 9 games of the season. So what happens next? Paul George returns, but as soon as that happens Tyrese Maxey then gets injured. And the two of them play one whole game together. The Sixers actually played pretty well that night. This is one of the rare coin flip losses of the season. It gets down to the final seconds in Phoenix. The Sixers actually blew a lead that night. They were controlling the game. And Paul George takes a last-second shot and misses. But here's the crazy thing. George admitted that he thought the Sixers were down 1 point instead of 2 points when he attempted that contested 22-foot step back in the game's final moments. That is bad. Really bad. I mean, honestly, it reminded me of when Donovan McNabb did not know NFL games could end in a tie. That is another classic Philadelphia sports moment. And B, it's also something I might not have said out loud. But George has overall, he struggled since returning, like Maxey. His scoring numbers are down, and he is shooting 39.6% from the field and just 29% from 3. I am more worried about the former than the latter. He looks like a guy in his 15th season trying to get to the basket, and that is a bit concerning. But then, as soon as George returns, basically, in his second game, Maxey leaves with a hamstring injury. And basically, again, what I have been saying so far, everything that can go wrong outside of a season-ending injury for one of these guys has gone wrong. And look, Maxey and George have not picked up the slack so far, but they are far from the only ones who have contributed to the losing. And in the interest of time here, I'm going to keep this section short because these guys are role players, but guys like Andre Drummond, Kelly Oubre Jr., Kyle Lowry, Eric Gordon, they're all struggling. And really, they can't make a three. The Sixers' lack of size, it's just everything is bad right now, and they have all contributed. But there has been a shocking development in the other direction. Rookie Jared McCain, the 16th pick in the draft this year, he looks like a legitimate building block. The Sixers once struck gold in drafting Tyrese Maxey just outside of the lottery in 2020. Now that one, those were kind of unique circumstances. There was no NCAA tournament. It was during the middle of COVID. Maybe Maxey slipped through the cracks for those reasons. That's not the case this time, and McCain has been the Sixers' best player. He looks like the best rookie in this class so far, and it's pretty rare to draft not just one, but 2 of those players outside of the lottery. So that has been a positive development, and that's something that the Sixers are probably going to reap the benefits of for a long time, but it's also really the only thing that has gone right so far. And really, here's the last thing, because it's the most important thing by a mile. Joel Embiid looks bad, and I'm going to give you 2 stats to illustrate that point quickly. Through 3 games, Joel Embiid has 44 points in 90 minutes. When Joel got injured last season in February, and he would have been the MVP if he continued at that pace through the entire season, he had scored 1,201 points in 1,157 minutes. That's over an incredible point per minute to not even close to that. And number 2, in Embiid's 90 minutes this year, the Sixers are getting outscored by an also incredible 21.6 points per 100 possessions. In 1,309 Embiid minutes last year, the Sixers were outscoring opponents by 10.3 points per 100 possessions. So that's day and night and day, whatever you want to call it. It went from great to bad, just like that. And that's where the Sixers are. And as much as all of this other stuff matters, Joel Embiid not looking like himself trumps everything here. If that guy is not one of the best players in the league, this other stuff doesn't really matter. He has gone from a guy who can score one-on-one against everybody in the league to a guy who's not even trying to score one-on-one against anyone in the league. And that goes back to the fundamental point that I think is being missed in all of the concerns about work ethic and physical conditioning. It seems very clear to me that right now, the biggest issue with the Sixers is that Joel Embiid does not trust his left knee. There's plenty of evidence for that claim, too. He's on record saying that mentally this was the toughest injury to overcome, and he's had a ton of them. And he's on record saying that he is having trouble trusting that knee. And really, he does not look like the same guy. The evidence is just on the court. This is not the same player that we have seen in past years. Embiid has a history of starting slow, but I looked at his third games, which is what this Miami game was. He scored in his last 2 seasons. His third game, he scored 40 points in one of those games. And then last year, he put up 35, 15, and 7 in the other one. So this is a different type of thing. And I hope Joel gets it back. But we need to at least admit that the baseline here is a lot lower than it has been in past years. And so that brings us to this team meeting. You might think I have been defending Embiid for most of this video, but I will not do so here. An NBA team develops its culture, and that starts with the lead dog, the guy at the top. You have seen that kind of some positive examples have been Steph Curry in Golden State, Tim Duncan in San Antonio, but that's the case for every single team. And if Embiid, who just signed a 3-year, $193 million extension, is showing up late for everything, well, I mean, that's just not good enough. Like, Tyrese Maxey was right to call him out them, and good for Tyrese, who is one of the nicest and most pleasant people I have ever been around. So for him to be kind of driven to this point, that is absolutely damning for Joel Embiid. So Embiid he'll get roasted both locally and nationally for this report. And you know what? He should. So where do the Sixers go from here? Usually these team meetings go one of 2 ways. Either you go up or you go down. And for Sixers fans, that actually wouldn't be a bad outcome. Either, the team would regroup and they would reel off a bunch of wins and they would quickly find their footing in what is a super weak Eastern Conference, or they just are the worst team in the league and get involved in the Cooper Flag Derby. Although their pick this season is only a top 6 pick, so they do need to be careful about that. But I guess we will see where it goes from here. That said, so far, this season has been an absolute disaster for the Sixers, and they got to play better. If you want to hear more about the Sixers, please subscribe to PHLY Sports and listen to the PHLY Sixers podcast.
We all silly like the mayor.